Hello, Psych 100 students. Here we go. Now starting chapter 12. I hope that you're all well and things are going well for you. This is the last chapter that we're going to be tackling before we get into, let me shift this a little bit, before we get into exam 3. So let's talk about chapter 12. Now, I hope you folks enjoyed checking out chapter 12. I hope that you've checked it out at this point in time. My personal opinion of chapter 12 is that it's one of my favorites. Now, why would I say it's my favorite? Well, when I was in college, very much like yourself, not under these circumstances, of course, but my major was psychology, logical. My minor was sociology. Put them together, what do you got? Chapter 12, social psychology. Now, for the longest time, I taught social psychology at our campus. As a matter of fact, they had not taught it for years. They were just sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So when I got the job, I told them, I'm your man to teach it. So I started teaching it for a while. But then along came abnormal psychology, and I wanted to teach that. And another faculty member said, I'd love to teach social psych. So I couldn't hog all the cool classes, so I turned over social psych to the other professor. Now we have it offered partly from the sociology department and partly from the psychology department. Eventually, I think sociology is going to have their own section to offer in the future. My brother, Dr. Campbell, teaches the other section in sociology, and a variety of professors have taught it in psychology. We're dealing with personal space and social distancing, and I saw this cartoon, and I thought, yeah, that's pretty much what's going on. This was before the coronavirus, of course. Some of us are used to engaging in a lot of physical contact with our loved ones, hugs and handshakes and things of that nature. Others are more standoffish. It just doesn't mean one is better than the other. It's just that what we're used to. So some people are really having a hard time adjusting to the 6 feet away from each other. I want to start off with kind of a bummer of a case study. It's my case study for this section, and the name of it is, I like to call it, is Kitty. And her real name is Catherine Genovese, or Kitty Genovese. And it happened in the early 1960s in a city called the Big Apple. And of course, you're familiar that the Big Apple is New York City. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to New York City, but the students I've talked to and my own personal experience with New York City is that it's very big, very busy. Lots of people are on the move. That's why probably they have a high case rate of COVID-19 right now, because it's very dense, densely populated. There's not as many people that drive like we do here in Southern California, because there's no reason to drive. You have subways, you have other forms of transportation, or you just walk. So Kitty, who was in her mid to late 20s, she decided to go to work that night, as she always did, and she worked at a bar. And she was closing up for the night, and she drove to our apartment. She drove around the corner in the parking lot, and then she walked pretty much close to where our apartment was, where that awning is. While she was walking to her apartment, and keep in mind it's after 2 in the morning, a lot of people, despite the fact that there's apartment buildings nearby all around, due to the density of the population, a lot of people are asleep, not many people on the streets. But as she's walking to her apartment, she notices this man right here. This man starts to approach her. Now, you can call it intuition, you can call it spidey senses, you can call it whatever you want, but she felt something was wrong. When she saw Winston Moseley approaching her, she thought something wasn't quite right. So she started running. Some people think that she was running towards another bar that was in the neighborhood, not the bar that she worked at, but another bar, which would have done her no good because it was closed anyways. Some people think that she was running towards an emergency telephone. Regardless, Mr. Mosley ran after her and without saying anything started stabbing her in the back. Now, Kitty collapses pretty much close to her apartment opening on their first attack. And she's not a quiet victim. She's screaming top of her lungs, "Help me. He's killing me," right? She's screaming as loud as she possibly can. The evidence shows that the most initially, we thought the most anybody did was open up their window and say, "Hey, leave her alone." Well, guess what? That was enough for Mr. Mosley to leave the scene of the crime. He left the scene with the idea that, hey, I don't want to be apprehended. So he leaves Kitty there wounded. And as he's leaving, he turns around and he notices there's no car coming. There's no police. There's no crowd of people coming to her aid. He decides, I'm going to go and move my car so people can't identify the make or model or the license plate. And I'm going to come back and finish her off. So he dons a hat. He comes back. By this time, Kitty has managed to crawl. She's mortally wounded, but she crawls into the hallway of her apartment. And unfortunately, he just follows the blood path. And he sees her in the hallway. She screams some more, stabs her some more, and then rapes her, and then leaves the scene of the crime. Now, this is a horrible, horrible story. And what makes it even more remarkable was that initially it was reported that approximately 38 people saw or heard something of the attack, and no one did anything. That's what the headlines were. More recent research probably limits the number close to around 20 some odd number, maybe 22, 23 people that actually saw or heard something. To me, it doesn't matter what the numbers show. What's important of this situation is that people saw or heard something, but they did nothing. Now, the entire attack lasted approximately 20 minutes, 20 some odd minutes from the first attack to the second attack. When somebody decided to phone the police, that is, the police took less than 2 minutes to arrive on the scene. Kitty was loaded on an ambulance. Unfortunately, she died from her wounds. Now, if somebody would have called initially after the initial attack, she probably would be with us today. So this story horrified the nation. I had a student who was living in Boston at the time, and she said it was in her front page newspaper headlines. People were so horrified thinking, are Americans that callous? Are we the kind of people that don't care, that don't really come to each other's aids in time of crisis? Or is it just New Yorkers? It made us question our own humanity. Well, some researchers looked into this phenomena and they found this very unusual, correlation. They speculated that as the number of people increases when witnessing a potential emergency, the chance of us getting help actually decreases. And what they called that was the bystander effect. It's also called bystander apathy. It's also called diffusion of responsibility. They made the following argument that there are certain factors involved in order to increase your chances of getting help. First, if there's nobody else around, you're less likely to get help. So in other words, this idea that if there's other people around, let me rephrase that. The more people around, the less chances you're going to get help. That's what I meant to say. If there's nobody around, your chances of getting help increase, primarily because you feel more of a sense of responsibility. And that's why it's called diffusion of responsibility. Increased numbers, our assumption is, and this is what some people assumed with Kitty's case, somebody else is going to take a stand. Somebody else is going to help. If you just observe somebody helping, you're more likely to help that person. If you're not in a hurry, you're more likely to help that person. If you feel that the victim appears or needs help, you're more likely to help that person. Some people assume that Kitty was a prostitute and her pimp was giving her just punishment. Wow, how dare they? If the victim is similar to us, this makes perfect sense to me. You know, you're a college student and you're a single mom, and you see a single mom, we assume is a single mom with kids in a broken down car, you're going to relate to that person because you've been in that situation, so you're more likely to help that person. If you're in a small town or rural area, you're more likely to help somebody. People in smaller towns want to know your business, and it's just easier for them to help you because they're used to neighbors helping each other. If you're not the kind of person that feels guilty, right, then you're not going to help. But if you're the kind of person that's prone to feeling guilty, then you're more likely to help your neighbor. If you're not focused on others or preoccupied, or if you're in a good mood, you're more likely to help. These are factors that are very important to getting help. As a matter of fact, the researchers found that if you really want some help, let's say you're in a crowded city street and you fall and you trip and you hurt your ankle, it's not good just to say, somebody call 911, because well, all those people saw you on the ground, they all assume, well, somebody will call. Why should I call? Look at all these people with phones. You have to point out somebody and say, hey, you with the Kellogg shirt, call 911. So, in other words, specify a person and give them something direct to do to help you in that situation. Now, we found out a lot about the situation from the actual perpetrator. In this case, it was Winston Moseley, although he's changed his confession from time and his story multiple times. He said that there was no particular reason why he chose Kitty. He happened to drive down the street and saw her and figured, there's my next victim. It turns out that he has been accused of being a necrophiliac. And if you're not sure what that means, you can look it up really quick. And so in order to do that type of activity, he had to produce his own dead victims, so to speak. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about Mr. Moseley, as he died relatively recently in April of 2016 at the age of 81. Now, he has been accused and convicted of killing another individual. While in prison, he did escape briefly and raped another woman. He has changed his story, again, as I mentioned multiple times. He said that he had nothing to do with the murder, that he just drove there and some mysterious man killed Kitty, and that the reason he killed Kitty because she was yelling racist remarks towards him. There is an interesting documentary. It's called The Witness, if you ever get a chance to watch it. It was actually made by Kitty's younger brother, who often wondered, why would no one come to my sister's aid? And so he winds up interviewing a lot of people who at the scene who really did care for Kitty, and one person that actually did come to her aid. And he actually interviews Winston Moseley's son, right, to get his perspective. So now you know the sad tale of Kitty, and we're going to continue with, I think, a pretty interesting topics in the field of social psychology.